And the first person that will help us to wake up today is Garth Jordan. Garth's going to speak about Start with Simple. Garth is the Senior Vice President Corporate Strategy with Healthcare Financial Management Association. He prefers not to put a number on the years of executive and leadership experience in the for, non and for-profit other than to say the journey continues. So please welcome Garth Jordan. The journey will continue with Start with Simple. Garth Jordan. And remember, you can ask questions and comment during the session for the last 10 minutes of the session for Garth.
Hi everybody. How are you guys? Ready? So we're going to do a quick journey here. Quick couple things about myself. I've been a CSO, Chief Strategy Officer, a COO, a CFO in associations over the course of the last 20 years. I've also been in for-profit startups, helped a couple grow to about 20 to 1 to 50 million. So I've got kind of a weird angle on life, frankly, because it's been a bit of a diverse experience. But that's enough about me. Today we're going to talk about simple and the power of simple. We're going to take a journey. So we'll start with simple. We're going to be in a winding journey. We're going to start with a little conversation about music, and then we're going to talk about paper. Maybe we'll get into some gambling together, and then we'll talk about binary code. Pretty soon, not long after binary code, we'll touch on tattoos, just for fun. We'll then go naturally into fish and wildlife, as well as maybe a story about starlings. And then we'll naturally go from starlings into a conversation about the universe. From there, we will go back down to talking about aluminum, which is a lot of fun to talk about, and a little bit about healthcare. And then we'll talk about, I don't have a good graphic for business, that's just a business process, so we'll just talk about some generic business. And then we're going to land in some very specific examples about what HFMA is doing to use the power of simple. Now that's a very wandering journey. I work at an organization that is healthcare finance professionals, and they don't like wandering journeys. So for those of you who want your journey mapped out in almost an Excel format, this is what we're going to talk about today. How simple helps us create, how it can help us explain, how it helps us in our business. We'll talk about the results that simple can get you, both generically as well as some real life results, and then those examples with HFMA. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how simple helps us create. So in the first place, creation is kind of going from a point A to a point B. But what I really want you to be thinking about today, as we go through this first part of the agenda with simple and create, I want you to be thinking about how if certain things hadn't started with simple, these examples, and other things that you know about, if they hadn't started with simple, would they have ended with this kind of beautiful and stable complexity that we're going to explore together? Okay, so just keep that question in your mind. So I'm going to try to play this sound here. How do I do that? I'm not sure how to do that quicker.
We want the sound?
Yeah. If you just click that for a second. You might have to click play. Yeah. All right, that's me. And that's basically 4 beats, one longer than the other 3. All right, let's go to the next slide. That was me. So maybe I can play it here. So let's go ahead and play that, and then hit stop when I. All right. So now that's those same 4 beats, right? But now we've got 4 notes. It's actually 1 note repeated 3 times. And then the 4th note, obviously, is a different note. So now let's go to the next slide here. Hold on a second. Now, I want you to drag, before you press play, can you drag it to about 6-minute mark? Starting at the 6-minute mark. That's good enough right there. Okay, go ahead and press play. We're just going to listen. Right? I could have listened to that all day. Sorry. But the point here is it started with 4 beats, turned into 4 notes, turned into this beautiful, complex, stable piece of music. And when I say stable, I mean it in all dimensions. It's stood the test of time. So just keep that in mind. So now, you can't see it, but this represents a sheet of paper. All right? So we're going to talk about another simple thing, paper. So paper was invented in 100 BC by the Han Dynasty in China, right? It has contributed a lot of sharing of intellectual property to our society. But we're not going to be talking about the printing press, as we heard earlier, or anything like that. We're going to be talking about how paper can be folded. All right? So we had this very simple, very basic thing called a piece of paper, and now we've introduced just a little bit of complexity. This thing called folding, and we've turned it into a crate. So this is, of course, origami. What most people don't know is that origami follows 4 rules. All right, we're going to talk about those 4 rules here, and I'll try to describe them with these graphics here. So now we have a piece of paper and 4 simple rules. So keep that in mind. The first rule on the top left there is called the rule of 2-colorability. Basically, it means I can use 2 colors to color in the entire sheet of paper within, and the color will never meet itself, right? So it's kind of alternating. The second rule, which is hard to see here, is at the vertices of the folds, you have red lines, which are kind of peaks, and you have blue lines, which are valleys, okay? At the vertice, you'll always have a difference of 2 between the peaks and the valleys. So you count up the number of peaks that meet at the vertice, count up the number of valleys, subtract them, and you'll always end up with 2. That's a rule. It always works that way. The third rule is the rule of the angles. If you look at the angles around any vertice, if you add up the even numbered angles, they always add up to 180 degrees. Odd angles, 180 degrees. That's a rule. It's consistent. It doesn't waver. The last rule is kind of weird to explain, but it's a sheet won't penetrate a fold or vice versa. And that means if you think about the wing of the crane that I showed you, you won't see a fold in the wing. It's a sheet, right? The fold is always kind of disappeared, right? So those are the 4 rules. So the interesting thing with these 4 rules is that, and a sheet of paper, you're starting with something very, very simple. You can start to program computers to help you develop new folding designs. So this happens to be a dragon with over 400 scales, made out of 1 sheet of paper. All right? That dragon, it has a tongue, it has horns, it has claws, it has obviously 4 legs, it has a long tail. Here's a completely anatomically correct skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. 1 sheet of paper, it's got scapula, it's got pelvic bones, it's got teeth, it's got every single vertebrae that it's supposed to have. 1 sheet of paper, 4 rules. Here's something at scale. Look at this. These are actually larger than scale, a couple of cranes. You can now see, think about how big this sheet of paper was, right? Still, no one said that the rule couldn't be, that this sheet of paper couldn't be bigger than an 8.5 by 11 or a tiny little origami square. So now we take this concept to space. All right? And so scientists were trying to figure out how they could take a solar array, essentially the size of a football field, and pack it down into something smaller than a school bus. Well, they found the mathematician that developed these rules, or not developed the rules, but figured out how to program these rules with origami. And now they've applied it to a highly technical product. So, would they have been able to do that without starting with simple? Just leave that as an open question. All right, so now we're going to move on into gambling. All right? Promised gambling, so we're going to talk about gambling. We have 2 gentlemen here by the name of Blaise. I love that name. It's kind of a frat boy name, but that's okay. We got Blaise Pascal and Pierre Fermat. These guys are mathematicians back in about 1654. All right? And they decided that they wanted to place a bet with each other with a coin flip. No, they didn't have an American quarter back then, but I couldn't find a different coin. So that's what you got. So Blaise and Pierre decide that they're going to have a bet. And they're betting on the coin flip. Blaise chooses heads, Pierre chooses tails, and they say, we're going to flip the coin 5 times. Best of 5 wins, right? And they decided back then, this is a lot of money, they decided back then that they're going to bet 50 pounds. Whoever wins the coin flip wins 50 pounds. That's a pretty big deal back then, right? So they flip the coin 3 times. Blaise gets 2 heads, Pierre gets the tails, and then Pierre says, I'm out. I don't want to play anymore. And Blaise was kind of like, well, why do you want it to stop now? Well, Pierre says, well, I'm going to take my quarter and I'm going to go home. So Blaise, of course, his comment is well, then I win, because I won 2 out of 3. Pierre's comment is, well, we didn't finish the game, so you didn't win. So Pierre plays a little bit of a Jedi mind trick with Blaise, and he tells Blaise, how about we think a little bit differently about this? And this is where simple starts. He says, what if we look at what could have happened had we played the game out? And then we can decide who wins what. And Blaise says, works for me. So they decide to do a little experiment. It's basically a thought experiment. And they run it. And they realize, okay, Blaise can get a heads and win. He can get a heads and a tails and win. He can get a tails and a heads. And then, of course, Pierre could get 2 tails and win the game. All right? So in that thought experiment, they realized, well, Blaise wins 3 out of the 4 times, and Pierre wins 1. And so that means they should split the 50 pounds in 3-to-1 increment, right? So they agree to that. And what we find when we go back to 1654, this is kind of an interesting mental leap to be thinking about what could happen with this experiment in the future. In 1654, that leads to the birth of modern probability theory. All right, so now think about that very simple, very humble, but very straightforward beginning, and we have built empires on modern probability theory. Very complex, but still using a very simple concept. So with Vegas, you walk in and you decide you're going to bet on a roulette wheel. Roulette has 38 spaces, 18 black, 18 red, 2 green. You bet everything on black. You think you're getting 50-50 odds. Well, you probably know you're not, but you're getting paid out at 50-50 odds. Well, because of the 2 green, you're actually getting about 47.4% odds, right? So that 2.6% on 100 million in bets nets the house 2.6 million. All right? So yes, Vegas is built on losers, but Vegas is built on modern probability theory. Thank you, Blaise. Right? Thank you, Pierre. So now we're going to talk about binary code. I'm going to weave these things together over time, but we're going to talk about binary code. So a bit is a 0 or a 1, right? We all know that. A byte is 0s and 1s, 8 of them together, and together 8 0s and 1s can represent pretty much almost anything. And in fact, what it really reflects for us is our simplest form of language. So keep that in mind. It is the simplest way to represent language. All right? Of course, someone came along one day and said, hey, a 0 and a 1, I can represent also as an on-off switch. Right? So whether you know it or not, that's where the first transistor was born. So this is a replica of the first transistor. The neat thing about a transistor, well, it's neat if you're an engineer, is that a transistor has no moving parts. So a transistor represents on or off, which means it can represent a 0 or a 1. So, and in a highly reliable way. Very simple system, right? So now you've got 2 simple systems, language and electronics, meeting up together. You put transistors in series and you start to shrink them, right, into 5 nanometer logic chips with, all of a sudden you go from kilobytes to megabytes to gigabytes to terabytes, and then I can't remember what's after terabyte. And so you build the modern computer, and then you network those computers together, and of course you have the internet. But the point is not to talk about the internet, the point is to talk about the simple and humble beginnings of a 0 and a 1. If it hadn't started with something simple, like a 0 and a 1, and something that is highly reliable and simple, like an on-off switch, would we have what we have today in terms of this rich, complex experience that's also highly stable? Well, stable in some sense of the word, right? So now on top of that, now that we've built this thing that is now complex and stable, we've got companies that are now building on top of that new ways of simplicity. So again, ask yourself, would it work if we had to start with simple? So this is my tattoo. And the only reason I show this is not to brag that I have a tattoo, because otherwise I'd be showing it live in person. But it's to basically say, this is how much I personally believe in simple. I went to the tattoo artist with a design idea, and he told me it was going to be 3 hours in the chair and $900. And I said, guess what? I'm going to represent it in binary code. It cost me $250 and an hour in the chair, so simple works. I'm just telling you. All right. So here we are now back to the beginning of simple and create. So Gall's law, you can read it on your own, but essentially what this says is if you want to create something beautiful and stable and complex, you have to start with simple. If you go the other way around, more than likely you're doomed to failure. That's basically what this law says, and it has been repeated, vetted, validated over and over and over again. Just those handful of stories I told you do that. So another person that gets admired a lot, Steve Jobs, says it in a little bit of a different way. I love this. I still love this quote. We all know simple can be harder than complex. Simple is not easy. It takes work, but it can move mountains. All right? And oftentimes the way Steve Jobs is talking about it is you start with designing with an end in mind, a simple end in mind, right? And usually it's your customer's end in mind, not yours. So now we're going to talk about how simple helps us explain. I'm going to use some pretty different examples here, but hopefully I'll be able to align it with some business and kind of who we are as associations down the road. So let's start with a story about Zion National Park. I kind of want to tell the story backwards, but I'm going to screw it up because I'm used to telling it forwards. So I'm going to tell it forwards, just for sake of being consistent here. So Zion National Park became a national park in the early 1900s. And after a period of time, they noticed that the fish and the butterflies started to disappear. So they commissioned a study to try to understand what was happening with the fish and the butterflies. So going over time, they did this study, and of course, if I could tell the story backwards, because that's kind of how they did this study, I would tell you, but I'll mess it up. So I'm going to tell it the other direction, and that is, they found that the predator, the main predator, the mountain lion, disappeared from Zion National Park. So when the mountain lion disappeared, the mule deer population shot through the roof. So that was their only natural predator. So anybody know what mule deers like to eat? They like salad, right? They're vegetarians. Their favorite salad is the cottonwood sapling. So little cottonwood, pre-mature trees, they like to eat cottonwood saplings. So they go around eating cottonwood saplings. Well, where do cottonwood saplings grow? Cottonwoods are thirsty trees. They grow on the banks of the river. So they eat all the cottonwood saplings, so over years, no mature cottonwood trees are growing anymore along various riverbanks in Zion National Park. So all the cottonwoods are gone. So when there's no root systems, and you get high mountain runoff, snow runoff at various times of the year, all of a sudden you start to see erosion, right? Erosion of the riverbanks. With erosion of the riverbanks, you start to see the rivers widening, but it's the same amount of water. So the water takes up more horizontal space, less vertical space. The rivers are much more shallow. The fish can't live in the river. Explanation number one, fish are gone. Explanation number two, riverbanks get wider. What grows on the edges of the river are flowering plants. Flowering plants go away because their native habitat is ruined. The pollinators have to go somewhere else. Butterflies are gone. So that's a pretty cool, it's kind of disturbing, but it's kind of a cool, long explanation. And the point in telling you that story is that as humans, we have this interesting natural propensity to attach ourselves to the complex story and to the complex explanation. When the real explanation is, with Zion National Park, is it was humans, period. We moved in and we scared the predator away. That's the reason. So let's go on to this. I'm going to try to find, sorry. While I talk over the music, I kind of like the music. If it doesn't work, we can. So these are starlings. This happens to be a group of about they estimated around 50 to 60,000 starlings. And this behavior or this flocking behavior is known as murmuration. Murmuration can be explained very simply. If you want to read a book about very simple explanations, get the book. This explains everything. It's a really cool book. But this occupies about a half page in that book, this particular explanation. So starlings, murmuration is defined in three ways. Cohesion, separation, and alignment. Cohesion is steer into the average position of your neighbor. Okay? Separation is, but don't crowd your neighbor. And alignment is steer in the average heading of your neighbor. So those are three rules that govern this behavior. Now, one thing you don't see here is starlings falling out of the sky, right? So it works. Nature is brilliant in terms of its R&D, okay? I'm going to come back to this behavior in a second. I could watch this all day too. So like this and Beethoven give me goosebumps. But I'm going to try to move to the next slide. Okay, does anybody know what biomimicry is? So it's basically us taking lessons from nature and engineering them into kind of human products and services and such. So the reason I wanted to show you the starlings first because I'm going to come back to that, but I have to kind of give you my own little side journey. I love biomimicry, so I want to give you an idea of how biomimicry works. The Shinkansen bullet train is one of the more aerodynamic products on Earth, and it's modeled after the kingfisher bird, right? So that's where the design inspiration came from. On the right here is a new design for a medical staple that won't have to curve in. All right, what do you think it's modeled after? On the left, top left, that's a highly magnified version of something. What do you think that is? It's a porcupine quill. Right? So the porcupine quill is inspiring medical device. So of course that's a seagull wing, and seagulls can fly over the ocean for days on end. If you just look at it, you can tell how we modeled our airplane wings after it. So that's a blue whale flipper, and that on the left is the new design of a wind turbine blade. So there's some interesting inspiration there. This is the Stenocara beetle, and the Stenocara beetle harvests water out of the air in one of the driest places on Earth in order to survive. So on the right-hand side is a device modeled after the Stenocara beetle that allows people who live in dry climates to get water out of air during certain times of day. Pretty cool. And then finally, we got the termite mound. So the termite mound is in the top left. And in the bottom here, you'll see that when it's 95 to 105 degrees outside, the termite mound on the inside is quite nice and cool. And it's because it's got a natural ventilation system. Well, now they're looking at ventilation systems in high-rises to reduce carbon emissions and the use for air conditioning. So my point in telling you all of that is to ask you a question and to leave you with the question. All right? It's not to give you an answer, but it's to leave you with a question, because I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, and that is, when you think about starlings, and you think about cohesion, separation, and alignment, and three simple rules that govern this complex behavior where no birds are crashing into each other, why can't our teams operate like that with 3 rules or less?
underrated the complexity of the human being.
Yeah, maybe. But those two humans up there on the right, there's always one of them. In this case, there's two. Right? So it's not perfect, but it's close. I'm glad you said that, because I wasn't planning. We didn't plan that, did we? Right? Okay, so now we're going to jump into the universe for a second. And the Hubble telescope was launched a while back. We now have what we call the Hubble bubble, which is basically in any direction as far as the Hubble can see. So the Hubble bubble, it really expanded our understanding of how big the universe is, and I still don't think we know, but it's, you know, as far as we can see. So I think it's like, I can't remember what the number is, you know, it's a couple billion light years, 14 billion light years or something like that. But what it kind of opened our eyes up to is the size of the universe. So right now our observable size, these are obviously very broad estimates here. Our observable size is something like several million galaxies. I can't remember the exact number, but I do remember it. The approximation is 700 sextillion stars. Okay, so that is a 7 with 23 zeros after it, which is 7. I think it's 700,000 billion billion. Maybe that helps. So anyway, the point is, it's kind of big, right? That's the point. But it's also microscopically small, so we also have quantum physics. The interesting thing is that there are 7 laws, if you will, or groups of laws that help us understand how the universe works, both at this massive scale as well as at the subatomic scale. So I can't repeat all 7, I can try. So I'm going to try, but I'll probably get to 5 or 6. So there's laws of motion, those are from Newton. We have mass energy conservation. We have gravity. We have thermodynamics. We have electrostatic laws. We, of course, have Einstein's theory of, not relativity, but it's the speed of light. And then I'm missing one, sorry. So I got 6 out of 7. The point in talking about this is not to demonstrate that I know what the 7 laws are, because clearly I don't, but it's to say these 7 laws can actually fit on a couple pages, all right? At least the basics of them can. And we've got this pretty big and complex thing, and we're able to kind of figure out how to describe it. So when at one of my roles as a COO, walking in the door one day, I asked, help me understand our members. What do our members want from us? So this is what I got. All right? If this looks familiar, basically what this was after I answered the question, or asked the question, tell me what our members want, I literally got, and I said, just go back at most 2 years of research that we have. So the staff from the organization piled up about that much paper on my desk. So I got in a room with them and I said, this isn't really what I was kind of looking for, but that's my problem because I didn't ask the question right. So I said, what does this tell us? So I got a lot of blank stares, which is, you know, kind of expected. But then all of a sudden, people started to launch into, well, this piece of research here, I'll pull this out, this tells us that they want a better price. This piece of research here tells us that we should have created this newsletter. This piece of research here, and so we went through that. And we were doing that for about an hour, where everybody started to pull the stack apart. And what I think we were struggling with was trying to take knowledge, which was a stack of knowledge, and distill it into 1 or 2 simple ideas. So I volunteered and I said, I'm going to take all of this content and I'm going to read through all of it. And I'm going to start to take a lot, especially a lot of the qualitative content, very rich, you know, comments and surveys and that kind of stuff. And when I took it back and I looked at it and I distilled it, this is Garth's point of view, right? I said, well, I think what our members are really telling us with this stack of paper is something we can describe in somewhere around 2 to 3 bullets. They want ease of access, they want ease of use, and they want quality. That's what they want. So why are we complicating it when, you know, we could be describing it hopefully in a way that's simpler than trying to describe the universe, right? So the point in telling you this is, again, to try to bring us back, especially as leaders of organizations. We get overly complex with our explanations, sometimes even with how we try to create stuff. And there is an absolute power in bringing things back to simple, right? So let's talk about simple business. How it can make us happy, right? Happier people, happier business. So we're going to start off with a story about Paul O'Neill, who in 1987, Paul O'Neill was hired as the CEO of Alcoa. So Alcoa is an aluminum manufacturer, and it was kind of going down the tubes. So of course they hired a new CEO. So Paul O'Neill, in his very first meeting, he was in a meeting, I imagine kind of like this one, but with leaders of industry, but more importantly with a whole bunch of investment firms, right? So all the companies that own Alcoa stock. So they expected him in this meeting to start talking about things like KPIs, right? They expected him to start to talk about major investments, product development, all that kind of stuff. And so what Paul O'Neill said was, well, we're going to do one thing at Alcoa, and just one thing. We're going to improve worker safety. So it's kind of well known, but a reporter raised their hand and asked a question about something about, I don't know, product development. And Paul O'Neill said, no, I'm not sure you understood. We're focusing on one thing, worker safety. So at that time, about half of the room stood up and walked out, and they were all calling their brokerage firms, yelling, sell, 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 right? As you can imagine, because you think this guy's kind of a freak, right? Well, what happened was Alcoa's worker safety issues, they were losing somewhere around 2.2 worker days per 1,000 days. So in a year, given this focus, they absolutely brought that down. They brought it down to 0.2, so almost more than tenfold improvement, which is amazing just in and of itself. But what Paul O'Neill's theory was if I give people one thing to focus on, it's going to have positive effects in other ways. And he was absolutely right. So the kind of the list of benefits are long, and you can go kind of research this on your own. But a couple of the benefits were things like this. People started to look at, the more we touch this product that's hot and sharp as we're manufacturing it, the more we're putting ourselves in jeopardy. Let's create more efficient processes. So that was one thing. So they're just improving efficiency. Another thing, and this will just be the other one that I talk about, is they started looking after each other. You started to create a culture where people cared about other people's safety. And now that has many lists of benefits that come after that. So from a result perspective, what happened with Alcoa was literally a year later, Alcoa's stock was higher than it had ever been. 13 years, I think, after Paul O'Neill started and retired, Alcoa's net income was 5 times greater than it ever had been. So just something to think about there. I'm going to go into now a conversation that is a very personal one. I have a friend who lives 2 doors down from me. We sit on the porch and watch our dogs play all the time. His name is Rod Graber. And Rob started this company in Colorado called Halcyon Hospice. We were sitting on his porch one day watching my 3-legged dog get totally abused by his 4-legged dog. And he was lamenting having started the business. It was a $2 million hospice, and it had been at $2 million for about 5 years. And he wasn't necessarily this guy that was all about growth, but he was about, I started a company because I want to feel good about what I do, and I want to enjoy it, and I want everyone around me to be having fun. But he lived in this interesting environment of regulation and overly complex regulation. And he also lived in this environment with his staff of, if you think about it, complex relationships. So your coworkers, you're working in this business of helping people and their families pass away, right? So relationships are very, very complex. And he knew that going in, but the kind of the regulatory environment was a challenge for him. So we're sitting on this porch and we're talking about this, and this wasn't a one-time thing, we've been talking about it for a while. And both of us had just read the book, This Explains Everything. And we read the half page about the starlings. And I also brought up this whole 7 rules thing about the, or 7 laws thing about the universe. And I'm like, why are things so complex? So he went into his house and he came out with a 2-ring binder that was the employee policy and procedure manual of Halcyon Hospice, $2 million organization, almost a 2-inch thick binder. And he said, here, follow me. I followed him. He took the binder, went into the backyard. He threw it in the trash. He said, I think I need to start over. I need to start with a blank slate. And he did. So he said, come back, and I'm going to now create an employee policy that's not only 1 page and 1 page only, but it's 1 sentence. So I'm going to ask you out loud, anybody, can you guess what his 1-sentence employee policy and procedure manual is?
Don't do anything stupid.
Everyone here, first, do the right thing. Nice to each other.
Okay, so what I want you to think about is this. This created a completely different company and culture. This created a company and culture of intellectual curiosity, right? This created a culture of trust and safety. If I don't know something, I can admit it. This created a culture of interdependent reliance. I can ask a question, and if that person doesn't know, they're going to help me figure it out. It created a culture where collective knowledge grew together. People wanted to train each other. Perhaps most importantly, in Rod's company, from Rod's perspective, he no longer had to worry about titles. All the titles were gone, even his own. No one talked about him as the owner, the president, the CEO. Instead, the hierarchy was based on what you knew. And it wasn't about being the smartest person in the room. The hierarchy was, who do I go to? So it created separation, cohesion, and alignment, but with 1 sentence. And you may think that that's overly simplifying it, and it is. That's the point, right? So Rod's company almost immediately started growing. It went to 10 million, and he sold it to the largest hospice company in Colorado. That's the end of the story. And now he's running a fishery in Minnesota. Okay, so, yes, it's kind of strange. So I want to talk a bit about something generic. This is from the Standish Group, research from the Standish Group, and you've probably heard something like this before, but the typical features and functions used in software follows about the 80-20 rule, where about 20% are always or often used, okay? I like to think of this in terms of, this research is pretty applicable across products. I think of it as applicable to membership. We keep adding features and stuff to membership, and are we really adding features that are always and often used? Just ask yourself the question. Some are, some aren't. When 80% of features are rarely or never used, you're spinning your wheels. And we talk about, I hear it all the time, we kind of lament the idea that it's hard to stop doing stuff. Maybe because something brings in 500,000 adds a little bit of margin to the bottom line. But guess what? That is holding you back. What if, so just ask yourself, kind of go through the mental exercise, what if those resources that we're spending on this 64%, what if those resources were targeted towards the always and often from the perspective of improving them tenfold, making them more accessible, making them easier to use? Just ask yourself that question. It's not a hard question to answer, and understand that probably be better off not focusing on those things. So we talked about simple business briefly. I want to talk about results. So I'm going to talk about some generic stuff. First, the Corporate Executive Board, this is a pretty straightforward piece of research, but they researched, what if we just make buying decisions easier for people? What if a company just improves the purchase pathway? I was talking with an association the other day. They have 17 different member choices for membership. 17, okay, and I'll come back to that in a second. But the research showed that if you improve the simplicity of your decision pathway just by 20%, that what that does with your existing customers is it increases their loyalty to you by almost double, by 96%. For customers who are even considering you, it almost doubles to 86% their likelihood to buy from you. Now the reason for that is it's not just a simple issue, it's a trust issue. So my example around that one is the difference between Southwest and Spirit. Now Southwest, they both kind of make the pathway relatively easy, but what happens is Spirit starts to just nickel and dime the heck out of you, and they degrade trust. Doesn't mean it's not necessarily simple, but they've simplified the decision process. And then for those customers who do buy from you, and your process is simple, you've almost doubled their likelihood to recommend you to someone else. And that's what we all want in terms of like member get a member campaign, referrals, and all that good stuff. So another set of research I want to highlight comes from Siegel and Gale, and they've done this research now for 8 years. And the research essentially reaches about 15,000 consumers, about 800 different companies, and it is worldwide. So keep those numbers in mind. And what they do is they said, their research shows that if you take the top 10 out of those 800 companies, the 10 that basically get graded as the simplest to use, the simplest to buy from, etc., if you had invested in a mutual fund that only invested in those 10 companies equally, you would have outperformed the stock market by 679%. Your returns would have been 830%, but your outperformance is well over 600%. That just tells you something about consumer behavior right there, that alone. But even better, simplicity pays. For companies that are ranked higher on that simplicity scale, the percentage of consumers willing to pay more for a simpler service is 55%. Seems counterintuitive. We think if we add more features and add more stuff to the mix, they will be willing to pay more. Not necessarily true. You also get an increase in loyalty, right? So you basically get to see that people are more likely to recommend brands with an overall simpler experience. All right? Those companies, those 800 companies that they researched, they also found that about $100 billion was being left on the table for those companies that did not provide a simple experience. The company ranked number 4 on that list of 800 is Costco. I want to highlight that just for a second because Costco's simple. You join, and they promise you really good prices and good quality, and they deliver. That's it. And the online experience is fine, and the store experience is fine, but that's what they do. They don't degrade your trust by messing around with the purchase experience. They return items. All that stuff is pretty standard, but they focus on one thing, and they do it exceptionally well. And they are ranked number 4 in the world in the simple model. So now I'm going to get to how we at HFMA have applied simple to our business, to give you maybe 3 examples to show you that it's also a very flexible concept, right? The first is that we have launched a new membership model. And now, if I go back about 3 years when I started with HFMA, we were starting to see membership numbers slide, total revenue on a slide. We were seeing the world around us move towards simple. We were seeing consumer behaviors, around everything from like these subscription models. We were seeing companies like the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, of course Netflix, Spotify started to kick Apple's butt. That's because they're offering this really, really cool, easy, simple pathway to get access to everything you might want. So essentially, we basically said, look, why are we trying to swim upstream on this? We basically said we want our model to basically be the Netflix model of associations, right? So we said for us, content is anything we produce. It can be an article, a webcast, a podcast. It could be a digital event. It could be online learning. It could be a certification. No longer are we selling all these things separate. You just, if you will, become a member or subscribe to HFMA. You're basically going to get Netflix. Netflix doesn't charge you more because you want to watch a horror show on Saturday and then a kids show on Sunday with your kid. Not only that, they make it a personal experience because you get to see your little family logos up on the wall and all that good stuff. So we decided, and we basically, our project was kind of threefold. A, we changed our business model. B, we changed our technology platform. And C, we changed our internal structure. So our internal structure is we basically have a content team that drives the overall guidance of the themes that we work on, and then the production team that makes it all happen. And they get to decide, are we making a podcast? Are we making an article series? Are we making a certification? They decide. And they watch consumer behavior, just like Netflix does. And then they either get rid of stuff or they make more, just like Netflix, right? It's not that hard. The model's already there. So about 3.5 months ago, we launched that model. And we launched it with a 25% increase in dues. Going back to the concept, we believed that people are willing to pay more for a simpler experience. So our dues went from $335 to $425. So it's about 25%. My math is off. It's close. What we've seen is an almost automatic increase in retention of 5%. We also have seen now in 3.5 months, our average monthly new member recruitment is 20% higher than any given month in our history. So now that's 3.5 months of data. Yes, it could change, but right now, what we've projected, and we're also seeing more business partner revenue through advertising, which is kind of bucked a trend as well. So what we're already seeing with this model is when we look at the lifetime value of those numbers that I just described, we're seeing the lifetime value of those numbers at $3 million. And I know it sounds expensive, but that almost pays for our project that took us 2.5 years to execute. So, good news. The next area where we're providing kind of a simple, and this is, we're looking at applying simple, sorry about that, is we're looking at the association industry, because we're part of it. And we're trying to figure out, in the association industry, what do we do as an industry? Well, we do lead, learn, and connect. And in fact, it's kind of funny, if you look at the top of your water bottle, it says lead, learn, and connect under the org community stuff, right? That was pure happenstance. Lead, learn, and connect are verbs that are used on many, many of our websites, sometimes in our navigation, and even in our mission statements. What we're looking at as HFMA, as we go deeper and look at the qualitative input from our members as well as other membership organizations, people still want to lead, learn, and connect, but they want to solve. They don't just want solutions given to them, because that's not professional development. Professional development is not copycatting what other people do. Professional development is being part of the development of a solution and learning how to become a better problem solver. So when we look at the products that HFMA makes under these categories of lead, learn, and solve, right? Think about all the products you make: newsletters, certifications, services like you can write, you can speak, mentor programs, etc. They all fall under lead, learn, and solve. Lead, learn, and connect. Sorry. The question is how do you create products and experiences under solve? And that's what we're exploring. With what we don't have it yet named we have it named, but it's not an entity yet. But what we want to do is bring associations together. It's not an HFMA product. We want to bring associations together under this banner called WISE, or Wicked Solutions for Everyone. We want to create an association cooperative where together we look at that verb solve and we create products and services that then we can use as a cooperative for our members. So if you go back 50 years and think, what if associations had created a cooperative around learn? No offense to business partners at all in the room here, but if we had created a cooperative around learn, maybe we would own our own LMS. It's a possibility, right? So why not think about solve that way? My last example is our strategic plan. and simplifying our strategic plan. Anyone here have an overly complicated strategic plan by any chance? Okay. So we're simplifying our strategic plan using the now, near, far framework. And essentially what it means, I'll tell you what each one means with an example next to it. So now is about being successful right now while making critical pivots to the far. All right? And that's easier said than done, but I'm going to use Ford. Ford has said they're going to end the sales of cars in the United States and across the world in order to free up $7 billion of resources, because they believe the future is electric, autonomous vehicles, and platforms of transportation. So right now, they need to be successful and be a profitable organization, but in doing so, they have to stop this in order to free up resources. From a near perspective, you want to place bets on the future. You have to envision the future. You can't just let it happen. As they say, creating the future is easier than predicting it, right? That's basically what they're doing. Place bets on the future and start to pivot your resources to support those endeavors, right? Those bets. So Ford's near statement is we're going to transform the F-150s and SUVs, which are their most popular vehicles, into fully electric and fully autonomous vehicles. That is a big deal. But they're giving themselves some time to do that. Now their FAR statement, is about envisioning a future state and role for a role for your company, a role for your organization. Knowing that while you're doing that, prediction is not easy, and you may be chasing a moving target. But that uncertainty is okay. You're still simple. The FAR version for Ford is to develop a portfolio that supports multiple modes of transportation for people working together in a connected and consumer-centric fashion. That is no longer a car manufacturer or just a car manufacturer, but they're seeing a different future. So this is what HFMA has decided. If it's good for one of the more complex and larger organizations in the US, it might be good enough for our association to simplify our strategic planning process. So where we're at right now is we've done a little bit of research. We used design thinking to involve our board, our members, our non-members, and we basically got a very interesting vision, collective vision, of what our folks, whether they're members or not, board members and volunteers, we got this collective vision of what our folks think the future of healthcare looks like. Now you can go out and research that and come up with your own conclusion, but we wanted it to be an inclusive kind of co-creative process. Now, we'll talk about the future in a minute, but our now is we need to improve member engagement. That's one reason why we did our Netflix model. And we need to improve our retention right now, and that's where we're heading and what we're doing. But we need to do that and reduce some superfluous waste in features. So that gets to that 64% of features. We want to start saving some money and some resources. We want to free up a couple $1 million of that. That allows us to start to make a pivot. In the near term, we're going to take our new Netflix type of platform, we're going to augment it, we're going to start to add a broader taxonomy to it. So instead of just being about healthcare finance, we want to be about the business of healthcare. Starts to broaden the funnel of people that might be interested in working with our organization. In broadening that taxonomy, we're going to start to create some new content. But we're going to focus on 5 to 10 features that matter. We're not going to create and continue to make new features. We might improve what we have, like an online community, but we're not going to go to the ends of the earth to add bells and whistles. And from a FAR perspective, it sounds a little bit like the Ford, but we want to create a consumer-centric and very simple platform, right? This supports multiple professionals who care about the business of healthcare, where they can not only learn from each other, but they can connect with each other. So the main reason for this is, when you think about the challenges in our industry in healthcare, I'll pick on one like price transparency. You don't know how much something is going to cost you when you go to the doctor, right? When you look at price transparency, that seems like a simple challenge. It's easy to describe it as price transparency, but it is difficult to deal with it unless you have multiple professions working on it together. As professional societies, we tend to get a little bit myopic because our job is to represent a discipline. we believe that we need to find a place where people can come together and work on some of those more vexing challenges. So that's our version of now, near, far. Then that rolls down into, well, what are the tactics, right? But again, it simplifies that. So I started with the idea of start with simple. Hopefully, my goal was to get you to think about how simple can apply to you, to your business, the power of it. And I want to end with basically saying thank you for your attention. And you got a few quotes to kind of walk away with. But I don't have a grand exit other than that. Thank you.